Today we're going to talk about how to prevent active shooters in schools and how to get them to stop killing kids. So that's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to mention Uvalde, of course, because that was the hot news of the summer. Here's one of the parents, a picture of his daughter, and here's a report that we're going to actually read some of the last 7 pages of. It's a 77-page report, and the first 70 pages talk about everything that happened right down to the minute and all the mistakes that were made. And then from 71 to 77, it talks about the solution. So we're going to just touch on that too. And again, we have the chat function working now, so you can either send me a chat message anytime if you want to, like I sent you. There's also a Q&A thing, and if you want, you can also send me a question if you want at all, anytime. And you could just hit that Q&A and type in your question, and I can answer it for you, or I can answer it for you later, whatever you prefer. But here we go. So I know you already know who I am. I know you know who I am, but this is just a little reminder of who I am. So I was really surprised when they changed the route about 3 months ago. I got a notification. National Health Administration now says that guns are the number one cause of death among children as of 2020. And before that, it was, a long time ago, it was measles, and then, polio and everything else. And then automobile crashes were the worst. And now it's changed to being guns as the number one leading cause of death among children. Worry about having an active shooter is a number one issue that keeps management and parents and teachers awake at night, especially in the school. So you've seen what happened in Sandy Hook that happened on December 14th, 2012. Alex Jones was in court about a month ago. He got sued for using the Sandy Hook incident by saying it was a false flag and all this stuff, which of course it wasn't. I know people who live in that town and right in Sandy Hook, and they told me that it happened. They saw it. They saw the cars. They saw everything that happened. They know people who lost children there. But he went ahead and kept saying that it wasn't true and it was something the government made up. And so the judge leaned over and said to him, "Sir, did anybody tell you what perjury is?" And in that was one of the worst ones for children, where 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7 were shot and killed. And I remember exactly where I was that day. It was right before Christmas. I was in the Toys R Us with my son shopping for his 2 6-year-old twins for Christmas presents. And I kept getting a notice saying 2 children have been killed, in Connecticut. And then I finally got up to like 10 children had been killed. I went out to the car and started watching the messages, and I found out what had happened. In this case, in Sandy Hook, just like in Parkland, just like in Uvalde, the kids bled out of the school waiting for the first responders to come in. So also just recently, June 28th, school shootings hit the highest levels ever on record, according to federal data. It shows 93 school shootings from the last school year, increasing from 11 a decade ago, going from 11 to 93. And again, here's my point, is why are we doing this? We know something is horrible and affects more and more people, and we put all these things in place. We take all the schools and make them do drills, and they complain about it, but at least they do them. We have awareness training for teachers. We have all these things that we're putting in place. We have door stops. We have alarms. We have panic alarms. We have all these billions of dollars spent on all these things. And does it get better? No, it goes from 11 to 93 in 10 years. So we're not doing something wrong. Not doing something right. We're doing everything wrong. And here's a map of the school shootings. So you can't say, oh, it's just the South, or it's just California, or really it's just Washington and Oregon and Idaho, or it's up the Eastern Seaboard, or it's around the Great Lakes, because it's everywhere. It's in Texas. It's in New Mexico. It's in California, Florida, Alabama. It's everywhere. It's so bad. And although the rate of non-fatal violent victimization at school for 12 to 18-year-olds was lower in 2019 than it was in 2009, and that's, I think, we're working on things like bullying and doing those kind of intimidating children. There were more school shootings with casualties in 2021, that's last year, than any other year since data began collection in 2000. And again, increasing from 11 to 93. And it's just getting worse. So how are we going to keep people out of these facilities? The only way to stop this is to prevent people from getting in with weapons, whether it's a knife or a gun, doesn't make a difference. It's an X-Acto knife, or whether it's a homemade bomb, doesn't matter. You have to keep these people out of the schools. the days that I'm not talking about school safety, I'm talking about healthcare and hospital safety. It's the same thing there. If you don't have a way to stop these people before they get into your facility, you're going to be killing children just as if you'd bought the gun and fired it yourself. So what we want to do is find a way to keep people who have concealed weapons on their bodies out of the facility 100% of the time. That's what we're going for here. That's what I'm going for. And this is a summary. I'll send it to you after this is over. Active shooter incidents in the United States in 2021, and it compares 2020 to 2021. And so here in 2020, we had 40 incidents in 19 states. Look what happened in 1 year. Went from 40 to 61 incidents, and instead of 19 states, 30 states. So it went up by a third in 1 year. Casualties, we had 164 in 2020, 30 killed and 126 wounded. And in 2021, we had 243 casualties. Again, a huge leap, and 103 killed instead of 38. So it's 3 times worse, and 140 wounded. So more people killed almost than wounded. One law enforcement officer killed in 2020, 2 killed in 2021. Law enforcement officers wounded, 11 in 2020, 5 in 2021. And this was put out by the FBI. So that's why they're looking specifically at law enforcement too. They want to make sure that they get those statistics in. How many of these met the requirement for a mass casualty event? 5 in 2020 and 12 in 2021. So they're getting worse too. Not only are they getting a lot more, and this is, I talked to a CEO of a hospital the other day, and he sat through this, and I asked him, what got his attention? Why'd he call me? And he said he just couldn't believe those numbers. It had gone in 1 year from 164 to 243. That's really the only number that we have to know that something's not going right. The school shootings with casualties occurred during the 2021 school year more than any other year since data collection began, according to a report from the U.S. Center on School Crime and Safety. That was a committee that I was on for years, and we talked about the victimization and everything. So now it's quite a bit past that time. I know because the twins were like 3 years old when it started, and I was in the Toys R Us being shocked, and now they're 12. So that just shows you about 10 years have passed since Sandy Hook, and it's still happening. And why is that? Because security is still an afterthought with a lot of people. Security is still an expense item for a lot of people, and it still follows a law enforcement model. So it's really not looking at what they need to do to stop this permanently, because the law enforcement model is not about stopping crime. It's about having a law enforcement person, when there's a crime committed, to go in and find out who did it and how they did it and and then turning them over to the justice system, whether it's local, county, state or federal, and they get their punishment. And this is not what security is. Security is about planning. Security is about risk avoidance. Security is about lawsuits and being able to reduce the number of lawsuits that you have. All these things are what security is now. It's not law enforcement model. And again, we have artificial intelligence embedded in these products that people don't even know it. They're not taking advantage of it. And they still have 2 different people, one who looks at IT and one who looks at facility security, when some of the facility security products are more complicated and have more artificial intelligence built in than the others do. Start and talk about what happened in Uvalde. And of course, the number one thing that we know about Uvalde is that 436 police officers and all sorts of law enforcement people, from Border Patrol agents to sheriffs to local police to out-of-state police, everything, they were all there, and they didn't open the door and walk in the classroom. And so 19 children died and 2 teachers died because they were afraid to open the door. This is the Texas House of Representatives. This is their investigative. They called it the interim report, meaning there might be a bigger one later, but investigative committee on the Robb Elementary shooting. This is the link for it. So when you get these slides, you can just click on this link and it's going to go ahead and open that up for you. And this is just some of the school statistics that we looked at. 6 incidents occurring in California, 5 in Georgia and Texas. You can see by the colors here, the darker the blue, the more incidents that there are. And all these things have just been going on. These are the active shooters and their locations. So how do we prevent this from happening? It's not really very hard. There are 5 solutions that you can use. One is to do the annual security risk assessment, which is absolutely critically important. And that's how I got started in this business, doing assessments for all sorts of entities like the Coast Guard, like the 9/11 Commission, like the Congressional Active Safe Commerce Act after 9/11. And so I've been doing them on hospitals and hotels and everything else, and now finally doing them on schools. But again, people don't do them right. They don't put enough emphasis on the threat. They don't know what the threat is where they are, and they really don't want to know. That's, I guess, the thing about schools is that a lot of people aren't obsessed with it. They want their, it's not their main job. Their main job is to teach. Their main job is to coach. Their main job is to counsel students. Their main job is to plan facilities. So they're really not focused on the security part of it. But unless you can fix that, nothing else really matters if you're going to have kids killed in school. It's just not acceptable to me, maybe not to you. So again, we want full facility access control. So we don't want you to get anywhere where you can't use a swipe card to get in. We don't want the doors open, especially the back doors. In the Uvalde, a lot of back doors were open. Everybody knew about it. You'll read about it in a second. And the other thing that they don't have that they finally started putting in hospitals are the concealed weapons screening. It's just really terrible to think about how many people go through these schools and there's no screening. They just walk in right off the street. They have guns in their backpacks. They have knives in their backpacks. I've tried to go to every single place where there was a active shooter in the United States. And one of the ones that I went to last year was Noblesville West Middle School in Indiana. And I went in there, and the guy who was the school resource officer took me up to the classroom where the shooting happened and showed me how they'd managed to put in new carpeting on the floor of the room where this kid raised his hand and told the teacher he needed his inhaler, and it was in his backpack. Teacher released him to go out. He went out into the locker area, opened his locker, got out his gun, and came back to class and shot his girlfriend because he didn't think she was being faithful to him. This was in junior high school. Thank you very much. The science teacher intervened and got in front of the girl, and so the science teacher took 4 bullets, but he didn't die. And he showed me. He pulled back the bookcase and showed me the bullets are still on the wall. They couldn't get money from the school district to take the bullets out. They replaced the carpet. The bullets are still embedded in the wall. And all they did was buy a bookcase and put in front of it. So need to have the armed officers there. They need to be in the very front where the kids come in the morning. As long as it's open, they should have those there. And the other thing we have to have are these secure doors. We have to have actual accountability for things that are wrong, like propping open. So many of these things depended on a propped open door or an unlocked door. And you'll see in Uvalde, they even told the substitute teachers not to lock the doors because they didn't have any extra keys. It's like, how much would it cost to go out and get 10 extra keys? Maybe $25 at the most. And they didn't do that. Instead, they let this tragedy happen because the doors were not locked. So again, the police response, it can't happen here, is the first thing they said. I saw on TV when they started reporting this that day. They said, we're this close-knit community. Everybody loves everybody else. We're just so peaceful. Nothing like this could ever happen here. Excuse me, it did happen there. So again, a lot of people knew that this guy Ramos was bad news. They knew about his social media habits, but there were no investigations into him. Nobody updated the policies and procedures. No, there was no warning after he shot his grandmother in front of all the neighbors and stole her car, her big red truck, and drove out, and he yelled over his shoulder, "I'm going to do a school shooting." Nobody called the school. Nobody called the police. Nobody called the sheriff's department. Nobody did anything. And they didn't. It's just amazing to me that people could hear that and not call 911 at least. Also, the commander on the scene didn't get notified that the 911 calls were coming still from the children in the school, because now all kids have cell phones after Sandy Hook and after Parkland, where I live, by the way. And so I get to drive by the school every day, the big 3-story tower where all the kids were killed. Their backpacks are still laying on the floor in pools of blood. I guess it's dried up by now. It's been 4 years. They couldn't get money from the state to knock the 3-story tower down. So they brought in a bunch of trailers for the kids to go to school in. The tower is still sitting there again, and we see it every day. Hopefully this year it's finally got budgeted to be knocked down. They never took anything out of it. They took the children out of it, and that's it. And they just sealed the whole thing off. So again, by not allowing the first responders in, not only were they shot because the police didn't go in to stop the shooter, which was his job. His number one job is to go find the shooter and incapacitate him. But even after that, they didn't allow the first responders in, who knows why. And so the kids bled out on the floor in the classroom. Again, they had no case management program from HR on the shooter. So nobody asked any questions or did anything, and there was no accountability. So I'm saying there have to be consequences for this. Consequences for the school resource officer just like the one in Parkland that hid under the stairwell, and we never would have known if they hadn't had a security camera fixed on it. You could see him crouching down and hidden the whole time the shooting was going on, right in the other side of the door. Same thing here. They began, Education Week journalists began tracking these school shootings on K through 12 school property. And they looked at how many shootings there, they started keeping track of it. So there have been 27 school shootings in this year, 2022. There were 119 total since 2018, which is Parkland, Valentine's Day of 2018. Highest number of shootings, 34 occurred in 2021. There were 10 shootings in 2020 and 24 each in 2018 and 2019. So again, they have this horrible, it can't happen here mentality. And you'll see this reflected in the Uvalde report too. And I think a lot of administrators don't realize that these elements, like having the training and two drills and all these things, they're requirement. They're not a choice anymore. Let's just look at the Uvalde report for a minute. It reported that the gunman had a, so this is, I'm paraphrasing you from page 71 to 77. The gunman Ramos, born in Fargo, North Dakota, grew up without consistent parental figures, in unstable housing and poverty, and his school wasn't much better. So just before, like the day he turned 18, he went and bought two assault rifles just after he turned 18. He didn't purchase the actual guns until he was 18, but from when he was 17 on, he started buying accessories like laser sights, extra ammunition. So he had tons of ammunition when he finally got the guns, all leading up to the shooting. And the other interesting thing that I thought in here, I don't know if it's Texas or if it's every place, but the gun sales that are reported to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, only handgun purchases are required to be reported to the local law enforcement, to police, sheriffs. So you can buy as many handguns and they can be reported, but if you buy an assault rifle and you're 18 and it's your birthday, it doesn't get reported to local law enforcement. And the problem with that is that local law enforcement doesn't understand what the firepower is here. And if somebody goes after do it, they could have 10 assault rifles and go in with 10 people and kill every single person, every teacher, every administrator in the whole school. But again, the report concluded there was no information known to Uvalde law enforcement that should have identified the attacker as a threat to any school campus before the shooting occurred. So again, they also quoted a lack of leadership despite having a robust police presence. I think over 300, it wasn't 326, it was 376, 376 law enforcement officers and kids in there getting shot while the guy stood on the other side of the door. The group of federal, state, and local officials lacked leadership. They had no way to communicate with each other and no urgency to take down the gunman, which is for the last 10 years is the first rule of a law enforcement officer when confronted with an active shooter is to take down the gunman. Previous official accounts placed the blame on their new police chief, Pete Arredondo. He was police chief, then he got on the city council, but they took him on administrative leave on that, and he finally resigned his position on the city council. So now he has no job or anything else. After he went to the school, when Arredondo, he was out doing something. When he finally came back to the school, he went to classroom 110, which had bullet holes, but no children inside. And then he was afraid to go into rooms 111 and 112. So he just prayed for those kids. And he thought that they had been empty probably, but they actually had more than 100 rounds fired in those other two rooms. He also changed the designation. In the middle of the incident, he changed it from an active shooter to a barricaded subject, as if there were no people in the classroom with the shooter. Of course, we all know there were. And now they say with the benefit of hindsight, we know this is a terrible, tragic mistake. They knew the gunman was in one of the rooms, but did not know what was happening. They testified that they didn't hear screams or cries despite hearing gunshots ringing out, which I don't believe. These are some of their other conclusions. Relaxed school security allowed the gunman to attack quickly. So they said that that school had a culture of complacency around those things, that for convenience, teachers frequently left doors unlocked or propped open, a violation of the school policy. And again, this is why policy doesn't mean that much. It doesn't mean anything unless you enforce it and you make an example of somebody, because how can you not follow the policy? If the policy is bad, you can change it, but you have to follow the policy or face the consequences. There have to be accountability. And again, due to a shortage of keys, substitute teachers were often told to circumvent the locks by leaving them unlocked. And these aren't my conclusions. These are the exact words out of that report. The school was also set up with an intruder alert system, but there were so many alerts that flagged the presence of fleeing human traffickers in the area that it desensitized the teachers to their It's their urgency, because none of the bailout alerts that they sent, it never resulted in violence. It never had a violent incident. So they just occurred that they thought that they never would. On the day of the attack, the gunman scaled a 5-foot tall exterior fence before multiple unlocked doors allowed him to enter the classrooms unimpeded. But if the school personnel had locked the doors as the policy required, that would have slowed his progress. For a precious few minutes, at least long enough to receive alerts, hide children, and lock doors, and long enough to give the police more opportunity to respond. Instead, the gunman killed most of the victims before any responder entered the building. And of 142 rounds the attacker fired inside, it's certain he rapid fired over 100 of these before any officer entered the building. So again, this is the same thing on the day of the shooting, I just changed it around a little bit. So now I believe that you need to have concealed weapon screening. That's the only way to get out of this continuing escalation. Kids buy more and more guns. They think it's sexy and exciting, so they buy even more. Concealed weapon screening is the only way to get out of this bad loop. And again, they're very affordable screening systems that keep the concealed weapons out. In fact, Cleveland Clinic installed the concealed weapon screening in their 3 hospitals in the northern part of Ohio, 3 most northern hospitals. In the next month, they confiscated 30,000 weapons. And this was in Forbes magazine. The CEO spoke at a conference about it. 30,000 weapons in a month when they'd never had them before. They had no idea, just like you have, if you're in the education business, you have no idea how many people are coming in with knives, with guns, with box cutters, with mace, with bear spray now, since the Capitol riots, all these things are coming into your school. And over 50% of hospitals and even less of schools, they do no screening at all. They don't even know who's coming in. And so you have to be the one who shows management what the return on investment. What's the good of even having a policy if spending time to write it, getting experts to sign off on it, making copies and sending it to everybody if you don't even use it? I mean, take the money and put in a weapon screening system. It also cuts down on how many security officers that you need, because it finds them automatically, notifies everybody automatically, can even lock them into a man trap. And I've seen Noblesville West in Indiana, that school that I went to that had a shooting. After you have a shooting, then you want to put all this stuff in place. So what happens is before the shooting, nobody wants to do anything. They're afraid to spend the money and they don't know if it's going to help. Take my word for it. It's going to help. It's going to change your life and change the life of all those kids too. So again, we use this, we start with the assessment, which is the methodology created by the Defense Department. I worked on the committee that helped write it in 1998, and it's for high value critical assets. It's used by every federal agency, every state agency, every county agency, every city, and all levels of government all across the country now. The kind of things we look at are how much does a control cost to put in place? What's the maintenance cost of the control over its life cycle? How long is it going to cost to get it adjusted every year? Things like that. What's the value of the asset that it's protecting? And what is the value of the asset in a school? And it's incalculable. It's the value of all these students' lives, the teacher's life, the staff life, it's a physical building, all those things that go into this. And also the retraining cost to find new teachers, attract them, train them, and everything. So it's the first thing we look at. Then we also look at how likely a threat is to occur. That's why this is so tightly linked to analyzing threat and the threat risk calculation, because what I see is that just today, I got a note saying that hospitals now, they're starting to talk about extreme heat as a recurring threat. Same thing like people in Kentucky who had a river where there was none there before, lost 35 people, were killed in the flooding. You have to consider that now when you go to do your assessment for the next year. That's identified that you lost 35 people to a flood where there was never a river. You have to go back and say, okay, what are we going to do so this doesn't happen again this year? Well, it's all about going back and continually reassessing and tightening things down. And we have ways to measure that. So we can measure the likelihood of the threat occurring where you are based on real numbers. The same thing, we can look at how many more controls you have in place and what percent of those controls are implemented, if it's 10% or 100% or whatever. And, what would be the loss to the organization if the asset was damaged or destroyed? And again, in a school, it has the most precious cargo, so it's incalculable, the loss. How we value that too, as you can see these big lawsuits come out. In fact, 5 days after Uvalde, 5 families and attorneys that got together in that town, and they went to a school board meeting, and they actually served the school board with papers and announcing they were doing a $27 billion class action lawsuit against all those officers who stood out there that day. The all hazard security risk assessments required. Either it's required by OSHA, where they call it a worksite assessment, or if you're any other kind of organization, it can be an all hazards risk assessment. It always has to incorporate the most current threat data. It can't be a spreadsheet or a checklist. So these are the things we go through. We analyze and update all the threat data. We look at the value of your assets, whether it's 200 children or whatever it is. Survey the staff to find out their awareness level. And I know teachers don't want to know, but we're going to have to make them know, and we're going to have to teach them. And also we can do that electronically to save time and get to more people. And then we rate and look at all the controls that you have in place. You probably have about 65, and we rate each one of them to see if it's in place. Is it working like it's supposed to? Does everybody use it? And then we prepare action reports by return on investment, and they're going to be presented, these action reports, to the school board, so that they will look at the budget, they will allocate money for these projects, and also so we can measure over time how it improved every year. So we're creating a cycle of continual improvement. We update all the emergency and incident response plans like I talked about, and they're based on the results of the risk assessment. So if one thing's bad one year, then we plan for it next year. Sea rise, especially extreme heat up in the Northwest, all these things that increase and get worse. These lawsuits, they probably had like 5-10 years ago. Now they have probably 25, and tomorrow they're going to have 50, because these are some of the ones, and every single time they had a security lawsuit like this, the company lost. So McDonald's lost a lawsuit for $27 million. After 2 teenagers were fighting in a McDonald's parking lot. U.S. Security Associates sued for $64 million, lost the lawsuit. It was a manufacturing plant in Philadelphia that made Kraft goldfish crackers. Stanford Health sued for $82 million, their hospital, after a woman stepped on, as she was leaving the facility, she got in her car right in the front of the glass door, stepped on the gas instead of the brake, went in the window through those double doors, ran over the director of Lawrence Livermore Labs in Alameda, California, which is a huge energy lab. And again, the family won $82 million. They lost the lawsuit. The hospital, Del Nor Hospital, 4 nurses received almost $8 million after they were traumatized and raped by a criminal patient who they had brought into the hospital, and he asked them to take off the handcuffs. So the county sheriff took them off. See what happened after that. So we had an incredible active shooter incident this year in the summer. We had the 4th of July parade that they expected no trouble at all and ended up with huge casualties. They had the oldest active shooter in history, 71-year-old, who went to the potluck dinner at the church and ended up killing, after he sat down and ate dinner with these people, had a nice prayer, and then he got his gun out and shot everybody. The Tulsa, Oklahoma hospital shooting, where they killed 2 doctors. Guy killed 2 doctors. As soon as he was released from the hospital after his back surgery, and they said they weren't going to give him morphine, he went to a gun shop and bought an assault rifle, came back, killed the 2 doctors, and shot the receptionist and just a bystander who was walking by. At Uvalde, we've talked about the Top supermarket in Buffalo, the Geneva church shooting, where the guy was he was Chinese, he hated Taiwanese. So we went to this Taiwanese church, and he actually brought Gorilla Glue. He glued the church doors shut. Then he got his nail gun out that he brought with him loaded, and he nailed the doors shut. Then he put a chain on them with a padlock, and then he went around the site and killed 10 senior citizens who were between the ages of 75 and 90. Then we had the Oxford school shooting. Since then, we've had probably the same amount or more shootings. And this is the parade during the Highland Park parade on 4th of July. And again, this guy got into the building so he could sit with his assault rifle on top of the building and shoot people from the parade. And you'll see in a minute how many people he killed. He was charged with 7 counts of murder. He was 22 years old, very violent. He wrote stories and posts about shooting and killing all the time. His parents bought him 2 assault rifles on his birthday. He entered the roof through an unlocked back door, and then he just shot people. They had no idea where the shots were coming from. People were just falling down. And then he drove his car 6 blocks after the parade was over before he was arrested. He shot and killed 7 people and shot and injured 47 people, more than 50. Incredible. This is the 71-year-old active shooter in the Episcopal potluck dinner in Alabama. He killed 2 and injured 1. The person died the next day, so he actually killed 3 people here. It talked about Geneva. Tulsa is where he killed the 2 doctors because they said they wouldn't give him morphine, and he went and bought the gun the day he was released from the hospital. And so here's what's changing this. I think it's the only thing that probably will is money. Security and safety are really about compliance and liability in these new wrongful death lawsuits. CMS, which is a medical thing for all 17 kinds of healthcare providers, everything from dentists to hospices to hospitals to critical care to nursing homes and the infusion centers, all those things, requires these annual assessments to be done. Also, the OSHA General Duty Clause that takes care of workers and labor issues requires employers to maintain a safe environment free from recognized threats. So that's why when they go through and say, well, did you notice, Mr. Kentucky School, that you had a river going through your right next to the school that day? Guy goes, oh yeah, we know it because we wrote it up in our report at the time. And these are the measures that we decided would put in place. We've already ordered or budgeted for 3 of these. That's the kind of response that you want. You don't want to say, well, I didn't know that that was a threat, So, and then they just passed a new bill that is going to be reconciled between the House bill against workplace violence for healthcare and social service workers. It's just passed the House in April of 2021, and then this last year, 2022, the Senate just passed it. So now it's going to reconciliation, and then they'll have finally an OSHA federal standard for workplace violence among all the states. But so right now, all these lawsuits and wrongful death lawsuits depend on the OSHA General Duty Clause. Again, furnish each of employees a workplace free from, this is a magic word, recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause serious physical harm. So how do you stop these active shooters? So you start with the risk assessment, the updated, so you know what the problem is. You build the accountability we talked about into security programs, and you've got to keep the shooters out with the concealed weapons screening. That's the only way that you can make sure that you're safe. Also, access control. You have to have the doors locked all the time unless you have a key card. They have to be locked, and they also have to be alarmed. And you actually have to have the cameras set up so somebody's monitoring them. It doesn't have to be their full-time job. It could be the receptionist can also be monitoring the cameras and the doors. So if she hears an alarm sound, she picks up the phone, she calls security, they send somebody over to check why the door's open, which door's open, all those things. And severe penalties for propping open doors. I was at a hospital 4 months ago, asked if I could get a cup of coffee in the cafeteria. They said their cafeteria is closed. I said, how can that be? They said, well, we had a rat infestation, so the cafeteria is closed for 2 weeks. From propping their doors open at night, rats come up, they hear the food service workers chopping and cooking and all this stuff because the door's wide open with a plastic bin in front of it, and that looks like an open sign to a rat. Probably the cafeteria is probably still closed. So anyway, we want to enforce the entryway. If you enter the facility, you have to come through a specific doorway. You have to walk through the weapons detection system, and the weapons detection system can handle 4,000 people an hour. So it's not hard to do because everything in it, you don't have to take anything out of your pocket. You don't have to take off your belt. You don't have to take off your shoes. You don't have to put your cell phone down. You don't have to turn your earphones off. It works automatically to take care of all these things. And this is just a little piece of all these different shootings and killings that would have been prevented if they had a simple access control system. And again, all access rules equally enforced for everybody, no exceptions. It means that law enforcement would have gone into the classroom in time to save lives. And it means doors are never propped open. It means first floor buildings are made of bullet resistant glass. It means all the rooms have doors and window alarms, so you're warned if a window is open, and also panic alarms available under the counters. And in some cases, the teachers can even wear them. They're only $12 to $15 a piece. And it means that there are penalties for door propping. And one of the things I do when I go out to analyze a place, like I'm going up to Northern Florida on Monday to do a big school. One of the things, that first thing I'm going to look for is to make sure that they don't, I'm going to do a lighting survey. I go out at 3 o'clock in the morning. I wake up and I go out, working to the school or to the hospital, whatever, and I do a lighting survey to make sure the lights aren't burned out. They're working where they're supposed to. They're illuminating the right places. And that's where I see a lot of this door propping open. One hospital I went to, they had 8 doors that were propped open at night, and they think nobody knows, but I know, the shadow knows. So again, we talk about the risk assessments. We talked about the concealed weapons screenings. This is really important. And it's so important that I actually introduced myself and met a company that does this and tried to help them make their system more understandable for people so that they can afford to keep doing this. And then we create this continual cycle of improvement where we get the report, we quantify the threats, we identify the assets, we analyze the staff, we evaluate the controls that are in place, and then we can make recommendations on the controls that you need, how much they cost, how much they save you, all those things. So these are the kind of controls that would normally prevent an active shooter. Having access control for all the doors, having an area of refuge, having bollards or posts so you can't drive into the front entrance, camera system, concealed weapons detection system, so you can see which controls, what would stop an active shooter. Cameras don't stop an active shooter. They don't even notice them. They're not afraid of them. Having a disaster recovery plan doesn't stop an active shooter. Having an emergency notification system doesn't stop an active shooter. Updating your emergency plan doesn't stop an active shooter. It may mitigate it if you have one, but it doesn't stop it from happening. So that's the thing about all these different controls, is it has to be the only one here that's going to stop an active shooter's concealed weapons detection screening. So again, we take all these reports, we put all the numbers together from federal agencies, state agencies, state regional data and plans, all hazards data plus industry data for whether you're a hospital, whether you're retail, whether you're school, whatever, university, whatever you are. We have the backdoor stats for all these things to compare with your stats. So we see how often does an active shooter or how, say, assault occur in your school? 5 times a year? Well, the industry standard is 5 times a year. And then we also check your uniform crime index. So the FBI rates zip codes and neighborhoods by their UCI. And so it's on a scale of 1 to 100. So you can see, for example, Washington, D.C. is a 5. That means that 95% of cities in the United States are safer than Washington, D.C. Parkland is 60. And that means that 40% of the organizations in the United States are cities safer than Parkland. And then the one that surprised me was Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills got a 7. And that means that 93% of the cities in the United States are safer than Beverly Hills. That was a big surprise. But anyway, all these statistics are available. We just have to get them and put them together. Now, what the product that I found that I thought had the most promise for actually stopping this was this Athena Security Entryway product. And again, it identifies with RFID badges so you can identify who's coming in and out. If you're an employee, it maintains the highest possible traffic flow of 3,000 to 4,000 people can just walk through in an hour. You can also unlock doors or open doors or lock them instantly. So if you're in the lobby and the students are coming through, sometimes they build like an anteroom in the middle, sort of where the block off part of it, make it into like an anteroom. So when they walk through, they're in the middle part of this anteroom. And then if they alarm and it sounds, then we can instantly lock the door right there and it traps them in like a man trap. Or you can use turnstiles to do that too. It'll lock the turnstiles. And you can look at the alerts and monitor them on your cell phone too. But I think that Lisa Falzone, who's the president, is a woman-owned business, is people want a safe and secure world while avoiding the feeling of entering a jail. And so they built a new metal detector that's nothing like an Air Force detector. It has has 2 columns and all the knowledge is in those columns. And so when you walk through, it automatically sees the difference between a weapon and a cell phone or your key or your watch. So you don't have to take anything out. You don't have to analyze these, and nobody's looking on a band that's going down the airport screening area. Actually, you don't have to go, there's always a big stop point there where the lady's trying to look in to see what's in your suitcase. Ridiculous. You don't need that because all these things have their own detection. They have their own chemical footprint and metallic footprint. And so these these two posts, they measure all that. And so it instantly knows if you have more than an acceptable level of any of these things and stops you. So these are the two bollards on the side of the post I was talking about. And this area is usually 36 to 40 inches. And you just walk through, that's it, 3,000 people, 4,000 people an hour. And we've done tests, they've done tests to make sure it detects more concealed weapons than any other system. So it also is the only one that meets the Department of Justice standard, which is I think 106.3, 106.02. Fewer false positives in blind tests with other products, has 3% less false positives, 3 times less false positives. It's the most effective solution because it gives you the protection you need for the least amount of money. And if you're interested in implementing it, we can even set up a pilot for you to try for 3 months or something like that. And it's very inexpensive. So it's gonna probably be the least expensive thing that you ever buy, except for the $12 panic alarms. So basically, bottom line is you got to guarantee compliance with the requirements. You can't have a policy that you don't comply with. You have to reduce your liability so you don't get hit with millions of dollars in wrongful death lawsuit. And it also will prevent these shooters before they happen. And if you've ever seen the movie Deja Vu, there's a part in there where Denzel Washington's the ATF officer. And he said, just once, I'd like to, every day, he said, I go someplace and I check out what happened and how it happened and how to fix it. He said, just once, I'd like to go in and stop something before it happens. And that's what we're trying to do. And I'm trying to do is to stop a horrible incident before it happens. So that means you have to go and talk to management about what you think they need to secure the school, whether it's panic alarms, what they're needing, screening, keeping the doors locked, all those things. And remind your management that lack of security is not considered an effective legal argument after an active shooter event. They think it's your fault for not knowing what was happening. So we start by analyzing the access control system and putting in a concealed weapons screening system to keep the weapons out of your organization. And again, doing the risk assessment up front to make sure that you get the best bang for the buck, that you're getting the most protection for those children for the least amount of money. That's what we're trying to do. So you can write me if you're interested in a demo, or you'd like to actually have a pilot project done for you. And I'd be happy to get that to the people that know. Or if you have any other question, you can feel free to write me anytime and I'd be happy to communicate with you. I'm at Carolina Risk and Security LLC.com, and Michael Green is the CEO of Athena Security that makes this Athena entryway product. And you can reach him at michael@athena-security.com. So again, I want to thank you very much for coming. And Tom, I really appreciate you giving us another chance at 4 o'clock since we didn't make our 2 o'clock. And I hope everybody has a great day today and a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much. And I hope I hear from you again. Bye-bye.